lonely rancher won a pregnant bride in a poker game. Unaware she'd change his life forever, he had lived alone for as long as anyone could remember. The ranch stretched for miles, a patchwork of dusty fields, rolling hills, and fences that creaked under the wind. It was a hard life, one that demanded patience, strength, and an understanding of the land that only years of solitude could teach. The rancher, a man in his early 40s, had inherited the property from his father. He had worked it tirelessly, year after year, from sunup to sundown. The routines were simple yet exhausting: feeding the livestock, mending fences, repairing barns, and tending the fields. The work never stopped, and neither did his loneliness. Though people in the nearby town knew him by sight, few knew him by name. He was not unfriendly, but his quiet nature and solitary life made him seem distant. He had friends once, long ago, but life had a way of pushing people apart, and he had grown accustomed to being alone. In a place like that, a man often has only himself to rely on. The silence of the ranch was both a comfort and a burden. It allowed him to think, to plan, and to be free from the judgments of the outside world. But it also weighed heavily on him, pressing down in the still nights when he walked the property, the stars above his only company. One evening, a storm rolled across the plains. The sky turned dark, heavy clouds blotting out the sun, and the wind whispered through the tall grass in a way that felt almost alive. The rancher was in the barn, repairing a broken gate, when a knock came at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone. Visitors were rare, and he wasn't a man to open his home to strangers. But there was something urgent in the knock, a rhythm that suggested persistence. He opened the door to find a group of men he recognized from the town, their clothes damp from the rain, faces flushed from travel or excitement. They invited him to join a poker game at a nearby ranch, a game that promised high stakes and, for some, a chance to change their luck. He hesitated. Gambling was not his world, and the thought of leaving his land, even for a night, was uncomfortable. But there was curiosity there too. Curiosity about the excitement of others, about stepping into a world he had avoided for so long. The game was tense. The room was filled with smoke, laughter, and the sound of coins clinking against the wooden table. Men exchanged glances, trying to read each other's expressions, their eyes sharp, their hands steady. The rancher found himself awkward at first, unsure of the rules and hesitant to risk more than he could afford. But slowly as the night went on, he found a rhythm, a flow that matched the calm certainty of his life on the ranch. He played carefully, observing the others, weighing his choices, and when he won a few hands, a quiet confidence began to grow inside him. Then the stakes grew stranger. One of the men, laughing with a reckless sort of bravado, pushed a small piece of paper into the center of the table. The others leaned forward, curious. The paper was a promise, a wager unlike any they had ever made. The man was gambling something that had nothing to do with money: his wife. She was pregnant, he admitted with a nervous grin, and he claimed he had no choice but to gamble her in the game. It was meant as a joke, he said, but the fear in his eyes suggested otherwise. The rancher froze. He had not expected this. He had played for money before, for supplies or livestock, but never for a human life. His hands shook slightly, though he tried to hide it. The room grew quiet. Some laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke or a threat. Others stared at him, waiting for his move. The rancher felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He did not know what to do. Every principle he had ever held, every moral belief, screamed that this was wrong. And yet, the paper lay there, a challenge he could not ignore. He thought about the woman, about the life growing inside her. He imagined the fear she must feel, the confusion, the sense of helplessness. He imagined herself walking alone through a world that had suddenly become dangerous and uncertain. And he thought about himself, about the quiet life he had built, about the emptiness that had settled in his home like dust. Could he accept this challenge, not for the thrill of gambling, but for a chance to bring someone into a life that needed protection? With a slow exhale, he made his decision. The cards were dealt, the bets placed, and he played as he always did, carefully, thoughtfully, aware of every move. Each hand was a test, a calculation, a measure of skill and luck. And when the final hand was revealed, it was clear. He had won. The man, defeated and unwilling to argue, handed over the paper and, by extension, the responsibility he had gambled away. The rancher felt a weight settle on his shoulders, heavier than any sack of grain or bale of hay he had ever lifted. He had won, yes, but at what cost? The night ended with silence. The other men left, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The rain had stopped, but the wind still whispered across the plains, as if questioning his choice. He stared at the empty chairs and the scattered cards, realizing that the life of another person now rested in his hands. He did not know the woman, he did not know her story, and yet, somehow, he was now responsible for her safety, for the life she carried, and for a future that was entirely unknown. He returned to the ranch before dawn. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He walked across the fields, feeling the damp grass under his boots. Thinking about the strange turn of events, he wondered how he would explain this to the people of the town, how he would face the woman, and how he would navigate a situation that was so far removed from anything he had ever imagined. The land stretched endlessly before him, and for the first time, it felt both comforting and intimidating. By the time he reached the house, he had made a decision. He would provide shelter. He would offer protection. He would do what he could to ensure that this unexpected twist of fate did not bring harm to anyone. But he knew one thing clearly. His life would never be the same. The rancher who had lived alone, who had spoken to no one for days at a time, who had measured life in cattle and crops, was now stepping into a story far larger than himself. And so, the stage was set. The rancher, quiet and solitary, had unknowingly accepted a responsibility that would challenge every part of him. The woman he had won in a game of chance would arrive at his doorstep, carrying with her a life that demanded care, patience, and compassion. He did not yet know her story, he did not yet know the trials they would face together, but he could feel, deep in his chest, that nothing would ever be ordinary again. The silence of the ranch, once a friend, now felt like the calm before a storm. The woman arrived on a chilly morning, the kind of morning where the frost clings to the edges of the grass and the air smells of wet earth and wood smoke. She had traveled alone, carrying only a small bag with a few belongings she could call her own. She walked with careful steps, as if every movement had been measured to keep herself safe. She was visibly pregnant, and the curve of her belly told of the life she carried, a life that until recently had been her own private secret. The rancher met her at the edge of the porch. He had cleaned the house quickly, straightening furniture, sweeping floors, and lighting the fireplace. It was a modest home, but clean and sturdy, the kind of place that could shelter a family, if a family ever came. He felt a strange nervousness as he watched her approach, wondering how she would react to him, to the land, and to the fact that her life had been gambled away in a game of chance. She paused at the doorway, looking around with wide, uncertain eyes. The rancher offered a small nod, a silent welcome. He said little, unsure of what to say. Words seemed inadequate. She hesitated, shifting the weight of her body, and then, finally, stepped inside. The house smelled of wood smoke and dust, a familiar scent to the rancher but foreign to her. She clutched her bag closer to herself and looked around as if the walls themselves might judge her. The first days were quiet. The woman kept to herself mostly, sitting by the window or near the fireplace, watching the world outside. The rancher gave her space, respecting the boundaries she seemed to need. He would bring her meals, check if she was comfortable, and occasionally ask simple questions. But he never pressed. Both of them were wary. She was wary because she had no idea what kind of man had won her in a game of chance, and he was wary because he had no experience with someone who needed care and trust in equal measure. Yet, life on the ranch demanded interaction. The chores could not wait, and soon the woman had no choice but to help. She learned how to feed the animals under his guidance, how to tend small patches of garden, and how to manage simple tasks that made daily life smoother. The rancher was patient, never scolding or rushing her. He noticed small things, the way she carefully measured the water for the animals, the way she cleaned with precision, the way she paused to watch the horizon as if seeking answers somewhere far away. One evening, as the sky painted itself with colors of deep orange and soft purple, she finally spoke about herself. Her voice was quiet, hesitant at first, but grew steadier as she shared fragments of her past. She told him about the instability she had lived through, a marriage filled with tension and uncertainty, and how she had felt trapped and alone before the gambling incident. She admitted that she had not known where she would go if fate had not intervened. She spoke of fear, of loss, and of the overwhelming desire to protect the child growing inside her. The rancher listened, silently absorbing every word. He did not interrupt or question. He simply listened. He felt a mixture of anger at the man who had treated her life as a gamble, and compassion for the courage it took for her to share her story. It was the first time he had truly listened to someone else in years, and it awakened something in him that he had long ignored. A sense of empathy, a desire to protect, and the understanding that his solitary life could be shared. Days turned into weeks, and the two settled into a routine. They worked together on the ranch, often in silence, but the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful, a companionable quiet that allowed them to coexist without pretense. They began to trust each other slowly. The rancher noticed her laughter when small, unexpected things happened, like a calf stumbling as it tried to stand, or a sudden gust of wind blowing hats off. She noticed his quiet pride in the land, the way he spoke softly to the animals, the careful way he mended fences and repaired tools. Despite the growing comfort between them, there were still challenges. The woman was cautious, her past experiences making her slow to trust completely. She would flinch at sudden movements or tense when strangers were mentioned. The rancher, in turn, struggled to express his own feelings. Words were difficult for him, and he had always relied on actions more than speech. Yet, every small gesture, bringing her warm water, ensuring the fire never went out, sharing a piece of bread, began to build an unspoken connection. One cold night, as the wind howled outside, she grew anxious. The pregnancy was taking its toll, and she feared being alone. The rancher stayed by her side, sitting in a wooden chair near the bed, his presence a silent reassurance. He did not need to speak. She felt safe, simply knowing he was there. In that moment, the distance between them began to shrink. The walls built from fear and uncertainty started to crumble, replaced by a fragile but growing bond. It was not just about the chores or the routines. It was about life itself. She began to notice small details. The way he smiled faintly when the first snow fell, the way he hummed softly while repairing the fence, the way he always checked that the animals had enough to eat before he ate himself. She realized he was a man who cared deeply, not only for the land, but for the life around him. And he realized that he was not just providing shelter, he was becoming invested in another human life in a way he had never imagined. One afternoon she wandered to the edge of the fields, watching the horizon where the sun met the land. He joined her, offering no words, only the quiet companionship of shared presence. They did not speak for a long time, letting the wind carry away the unspoken fears and doubts. Then, almost casually, she spoke of hope. Small hopes, fragile and tentative, like seeds waiting for the right season to bloom. She hoped the child would be healthy, that she could find peace, that life could be kinder than it had been before. The rancher listened, and for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the empty fields, a future where life was richer for sharing it with someone else. The town, however, did not remain unaware of her presence. Rumors began to circulate, whispers carried on the wind and through passing conversations. People questioned how she had come to live with the rancher, spreading gossip that made her tense and anxious. She worried about judgment, about being blamed for circumstances she did not choose. The rancher noticed her worry, and he made a quiet promise to himself. He would protect her from gossip, from harm, and from the world's harsh judgments. He realized that this promise was more than duty. It was growing into care, into a deep responsibility he had never felt before. Through it all, the unborn child became a symbol of new beginnings. Every kick, every small movement reminded them both of life's fragile beauty. The rancher, who had once measured life in routines and chores, now measured it in tiny moments of growth and hope. The woman, who had carried fear and uncertainty for so long, began to feel that perhaps life could offer more than hardship. Together they began to build a fragile sense of family, grounded in shared care, respect, and the quiet understanding that life had brought them together in the most unexpected way. By the end of the weeks, the woman was no longer a stranger in the house. She had a place in the rancher's life, not as a prize or obligation, but as a person whose presence brought warmth and meaning. The bond between them, though still tentative, was growing stronger. The rancher had discovered a new sense of purpose, and she had discovered that trust and safety could exist even in unexpected circumstances. Their days were filled with work, quiet moments of conversation, and the subtle but profound understanding that life, even when it starts in strange ways, could be transformed by care and attention. And so, the rancher's quiet, lonely life began to shift. The storm that had once brought uncertainty now felt like a turning point. Life on the ranch was no longer just about survival and routine. It was about connection, about learning to care for someone beyond oneself, and about discovering that even in the most unplanned situations, hope and love could take root. The woman and the rancher, once strangers brought together by chance, were beginning to write a new chapter of life together, one that neither of them could have predicted, but one that both would come to cherish deeply. As the weeks passed, the woman and the rancher began to settle into a rhythm that neither had anticipated. The house was no longer quiet in the same way it had been before. Small sounds filled it: the soft shuffle of footsteps on the wooden floor, the clatter of dishes, the quiet laughter that sometimes escaped her when a calf tumbled clumsily over its own legs. The rancher had grown accustomed to her presence, and he realized, almost without noticing, that he enjoyed it. Her voice, soft but steady, had begun to fill the corners of the house and his life, replacing the heavy silence he had once accepted as normal. At first, their interactions were cautious. The woman had learned to move carefully, to avoid sudden gestures, to keep her distance. The rancher, though patient, sometimes misread her hesitations. Yet, over time, those small barriers began to fall. It was not sudden, but gradual. An accidental touch of hands while passing a basket of vegetables, a shared glance over a steaming pot of soup, laughter breaking out over some small, inconsequential mistake. These moments, small as they were, began to form a quiet connection between them. The rancher began to notice her presence in ways he hadn't before. When she smiled, even faintly, he felt a warmth that the long days on the ranch had never brought. He noticed the way she gently brushed her hand over the belly that carried his unborn responsibility, the careful way she moved when carrying water or tending the animals. He found himself wanting to make her comfortable, to ease her burdens, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. It was a new feeling for him, one that he struggled to understand fully, yet could not ignore. She, in turn, began to see the rancher differently. The quiet, solitary man who had seemed so distant now showed patience and kindness in ways that were unexpected. He never complained about the extra work her presence demanded, and he never treated her as fragile. Instead, he offered guidance and support, teaching her how to manage the chores more efficiently, helping her lift heavy buckets, and always making sure the animals were fed and cared for. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of security, a feeling she had not known in a long time. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, she found herself watching the rancher repair a broken fence. The orange glow of the sunset cast long shadows across the yard, and the wind carried the scent of hay and earth. She felt a strange mix of admiration and warmth. He worked with a quiet determination, his movements precise, his focus unwavering. She realized in that moment that she was beginning to care for him, not in the way a person might care for a friend, but in a deeper, more personal way. The thought startled her, and she quickly turned her attention to the task at hand, trying to suppress the fluttering in her chest. The rancher, too, was noticing changes in himself. He found himself thinking about her when he was not in her presence, wondering if she was comfortable, if she had eaten enough, if she was warm enough. He realized he had begun to anticipate her needs before she even spoke, a skill he had never practiced with anyone else. There was a subtle joy in seeing her smile, in hearing her laugh, in knowing that she trusted him enough to stay in a house with a man who had been a stranger to her just weeks before. Their bond grew stronger through shared experiences. Together they faced small challenges on the ranch. A storm would damage part of the fence, and they would work side by side to repair it. A sick animal would need attention, and they would care for it together, offering comfort and reassurance to each other as much as to the creature. Each shared task built trust, and each moment of cooperation deepened the sense that they were no longer simply two people living under the same roof. They were becoming partners in the truest sense of the word. She began to speak more freely about her hopes and fears. She admitted that she had never imagined finding a place where she could feel safe, where the world outside would not press in with judgment and cruelty. She spoke of her dreams for the child she carried, of the life she wished to provide, and of the quiet longing she had always felt for stability and care. The rancher listened, often silently, absorbing each word, each sentiment, without interruption or judgment. His presence alone seemed to reassure her, and she found herself confiding in him in ways she had never done with anyone else. There were moments of tension, of course. Old fears and uncertainties surfaced, reminding her of the life she had left behind. She would sometimes retreat into herself, worrying about the future or fearing the judgment of others. The rancher, though patient, also wrestled with his own doubts. He wondered if he was doing enough, if he could truly protect her and the child, and if the growing feelings he had for her were appropriate or fair given the circumstances. Yet, each time these doubts arose, they were met with understanding and care, slowly easing the tension. and reinforcing their growing bond. One particularly cold night, the wind howling across the plains, the woman awoke with discomfort. The rancher, alerted by her movements, came to her side immediately. He helped her sit, offered water, and spoke in a calm, steady voice that seemed to calm not only her body, but her mind. He stayed by her side until she fell asleep again, holding her hand gently. In that moment she realized the depth of his care, the sincerity of his concern. It was no longer just a matter of obligation, it was a connection born from empathy, trust, and growing affection. The child's presence in their lives became a constant thread binding them together. Every kick and movement reminded them both of the life that depended on their care. The rancher found himself speaking to the unborn child softly, promising safety and protection. The woman, in turn, felt comforted by his words, seeing in him a strength that she had not expected to find in someone who had once been a stranger. The anticipation of the child's arrival created a sense of purpose, a shared responsibility that transcended the circumstances that had brought them together. As spring approached, the ranch began to bloom with new life. The animals thrived, the crops grew stronger, and the house became warmer, brighter, and more inviting. The presence of the woman and the child she carried infused the ranch with a sense of hope and renewal. Even the rancher, who had spent so many years in solitude, began to feel a quiet happiness, a sense of fulfillment that he had never experienced before. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that life could offer joy even when it arrived unexpectedly and in unconventional ways. Small gestures became meaningful rituals. They shared meals at the table, working together to prepare food. Laughing over spilled flour or overcooked vegetables, they spent evenings by the fire, talking softly about simple things, plans for the garden, the upcoming season, memories of childhood. In these moments, the walls of caution and fear between them continued to crumble, replaced by a quiet, mutual understanding. They learned to read each other's expressions, anticipate each other's needs, and share the unspoken language of trust and care. Though the outside world continued to murmur with gossip, the two of them grew less concerned with it. They found strength in each other, realizing that what mattered most was not the judgment of others, but the bond they were building and the life they were nurturing together. The rancher no longer saw her as a woman won in a game of chance. He saw her as a person with courage, strength, and dignity. She, in turn, no longer saw him as a distant, quiet man. She saw him as someone who could protect, support, and care for her and her child in ways she had never imagined. And so, life on the ranch moved forward, filled with quiet joy, shared responsibility, and the slow but steady growth of a bond neither of them had expected. The rancher and the woman, brought together by chance, were beginning to discover that family, love, and trust could emerge from even the most unusual circumstances. Each day reinforced the truth that life, with all its unpredictability, could also bring hope, companionship, and a sense of belonging. By the end of this period, their relationship had shifted from mere coexistence to a partnership built on care, respect, and quiet affection. The woman felt more secure, more hopeful, and more confident in the life she was building. The rancher, too, felt a new sense of purpose, understanding that the work of the ranch now included not only the land and animals, but also the protection and nurture of the woman and the life she carried. Together they faced the future with cautious optimism, knowing that while challenges remained, their bond had grown strong enough to carry them through whatever lay ahead. Life on the ranch had settled into a quiet rhythm, one that was both comforting and fragile. The woman and the rancher had grown close, their bond strengthening with each passing day. Yet, as the days stretched on, life outside the ranch began to press in. The town had not forgotten how she had come to live there, and whispers traveled faster than the wind across the plains. People questioned her presence, speculated about her intentions, and some even judged the rancher for allowing her to stay. Though most of it was quiet gossip, the knowledge of it reached them in small ways. Through curious eyes in the general store, murmured questions from passing neighbors, and letters from relatives she had not seen in years. The woman felt the pressure first. She had always been cautious, and the scrutiny from the outside world made her nervous. Simple errands that once felt routine now seemed intimidating. She worried that someone would say something cruel, or that they would make her feel unwelcome. The rancher noticed her anxiety, seeing the way her shoulders stiffened, how she avoided eye contact, and how she spoke less and less when the topic of the town came up. He tried to reassure her with gentle words and quiet presence, but he realized that the world beyond the ranch was harder to control than any storm or broken fence. One afternoon, as they worked together repairing a section of fence damaged by the spring wind, she finally spoke about her fears. Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not shy away from his gaze. "What if people think I don't belong here?" she asked. "What if they blame me for things I didn't do?" Her eyes searched his, looking for answers, for comfort, for some way to quiet the uncertainty she carried. The rancher paused in his work, wiping his hands on his trousers. He met her gaze steadily. "Then we show them who you are," he said. "Not what they think, not what they say, but who you truly are."
Here, with me, with the child, we decide that together. Nobody else matters.
His words were simple, but they carried weight. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a small flame of reassurance that she had not felt in years. Yet even as they strengthened their bond, challenges continued to test them. The pregnancy became more difficult with each passing week. Simple tasks became harder. Fatigue weighed heavily, and the rancher found himself taking on more of the physical work. At times she would become frustrated with herself, feeling guilty for needing help, and he would feel helpless, wishing he could do more to ease her burden. They both learned patience in ways they had never known before, and slowly their partnership deepened, not just in care, but in understanding, empathy, and shared responsibility. One day, a sudden incident reminded them of the unpredictability of life. A calf, startled by a hawk overhead, ran into the fence, tangling its legs in the wire. The rancher rushed to free it, and the woman came running behind him, her face pale with worry. Together they untangled the frightened animal, and for a long moment they held each other's hands, breathing heavily, feeling the rush of adrenaline and relief. It was a simple moment, yet it reminded them both how much they depended on each other, how deeply they had begun to care, and how fragile life could be when unexpected events struck. The woman's past also continued to surface in quiet ways. Letters arrived from her family, bringing questions and concern, sometimes even subtle criticism. She would read them in private, and the rancher would sense her unease. One evening, she sat by the fire holding a letter in her hands, her eyes misty. "They don't understand," she said softly. "They think I made all the wrong choices, that I should have stayed away." He sat beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're here now," he said. "That's what matters."
We're making our life, not anyone else's. Don't let them take this from you.
Despite the external pressures, they continued to build their life together. They worked on the ranch, prepared for the child's arrival, and shared quiet moments by the fire in the evenings. Slowly, laughter returned more often, and warmth filled the home in a way that had been missing for years. Yet the challenges reminded them that life was never simple. Trust needed constant care, love needed patience, and hope required courage, especially when the outside world seemed uncertain or judgmental. One night, As a storm approached, the woman became particularly anxious. She had been feeling sharp pains in her abdomen, and the rancher noticed her trembling with worry. "It's probably just the baby moving," he said gently, though inside he felt a knot of concern. He sat by her side, holding her hand through the long hours as lightning flashed across the sky and the wind rattled the windows. His calm presence helped soothe her, and she realized how much she relied on him, how much she trusted him, and how much she cared for him. The storm passed, leaving the land wet and glistening in the morning sun. The incident reminded them both of the unpredictability of life and how important it was to face challenges together. Each test, each worry, each moment of fear strengthened the bond between them. The rancher understood that protecting her and the child meant more than keeping them safe from physical harm. It meant offering comfort, trust, and unwavering support. She understood that life on the ranch, though isolated, was a place where she could find stability, love, and hope for the future. As spring deepened, their connection continued to grow in subtle, meaningful ways. Small gestures, a touch on the shoulder, a shared glance, a smile when no one was watching, revealed emotions that words often failed to express. They learned to anticipate each other's needs, to offer comfort without being asked, and to face challenges as a team. Every moment, every shared experience deepened the sense of partnership and the unspoken understanding that their lives were now intertwined in ways that went far beyond circumstance. The rancher began to imagine the future with a sense of purpose he had never known before. He pictured the child's first steps across the fields, the woman laughing softly as they worked side by side, the home filled with warmth and life. He understood that life, unpredictable as it could be, offered moments of beauty and connection that were worth protecting at all costs. And the woman, in turn, began to feel a quiet confidence in herself, in the life she was building, and in the man who had become her protector, partner, and companion. But challenges were never far away. Rumors in the town persisted, and at times her own fears threatened to overwhelm the fragile peace they had built. She would sometimes withdraw, needing to find quiet space, and the rancher would respect that, offering patience rather than pressure. Each difficulty became a lesson in trust, resilience, and mutual care. They learned that life's challenges were not only obstacles, they were opportunities to strengthen their bond, to show love through action, and to build a foundation that could withstand uncertainty. One evening, while tending the garden, the woman paused and looked at the rancher. "Do you ever wonder," she said quietly, "how we ended up here? How a game of chance could bring two strangers together and change everything?" The rancher smiled faintly, brushing dirt from his hands. "I don't think about it as chance anymore," he said. "I think about it as life giving us a second chance, a chance to care, to trust, and to build something real." The words hung between them, carrying a weight of truth and hope. They both understood that their journey had been unexpected, that the path to this point had been filled with uncertainty, and that the future would bring its own trials. Yet, in that moment, they also understood that the bond they had formed, the trust, the care, and the growing affection, was strong enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the days turned to weeks, the woman's pregnancy progressed, and the rancher's commitment deepened. He helped her prepare the house for the child's arrival, setting up a small room with blankets, a cradle, and the essentials she would need. He spoke softly to her and the unborn child, promising care, protection, and love. The woman, in turn, allowed herself to lean on him more, to share her fears and hopes openly, and to trust that life could be kind, even after hardship. And so the rancher and the woman faced the approaching birth with courage, trust, and a growing sense of partnership. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative, faced fears and uncertainty, and learned to rely on each other in ways neither could have imagined. The outside world, with its gossip and judgment, could wait. Their focus was on the life they were nurturing, the bond they were building, and the new chapter that was about to begin. The days grew longer and warmer as spring fully arrived, carrying with it a sense of anticipation and quiet excitement. The rancher and the woman had spent months preparing for the arrival of the child, arranging blankets, cleaning the house, and ensuring that everything was ready. The ranch, once quiet and empty, now carried the feeling of expectation. Even the animals seemed to sense the change, moving with a gentle rhythm, as if aware that life itself was about to shift in ways they could not understand. The woman's due date came sooner than they had expected. She awoke one early morning with a sharp, sudden pain that signaled the beginning of the labor. She gasped and called out softly, and the rancher, already alert from his own worry-filled night, came immediately to her side. His hands were steady, his voice calm as he guided her through the first moments of uncertainty. "It's okay," he said gently. "We'll get through this together. You're not alone." The reassurance in his words brought her a small measure of courage, and she leaned on him, both for support and comfort. Labor was long and exhausting. Hours stretched on, filled with tension, pain, and occasional moments of relief. The rancher never left her side, holding her hand, offering water and whispering words of encouragement. At times, she felt overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience, but his presence reminded her that she was not alone. She drew strength from him, just as he drew determination from the life growing inside her. Their bond, tested through months of care, trust, and shared hardship, had prepared them for this moment, and it carried them through. Outside, the wind swept across the plains, carrying the scent of fresh earth and growing grass. The sky shifted from soft morning light to bright afternoon sun, marking the passage of time as labor continued. The rancher's heart was a mixture of worry and hope. He had never experienced anything like this before, and yet he felt a deep responsibility to ensure that both mother and child emerged safely. He guided her through each contraction, reminded her to breathe, and offered a comforting presence that neither words nor time could fully describe. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the cries of a newborn filled the room. The rancher's eyes widened with a mix of awe, relief, and joy as he listened to the tiny, fragile voice. The woman, exhausted but smiling through tears, reached out to hold the child in her arms. The room, once filled with tension, now glowed with warmth, love, and the quiet wonder of new life. They stared at each other, realizing that the game of chance that had brought them together had led to this moment, a moment of creation, hope, and unbreakable connection. The first days with the newborn were filled with wonder and learning. The rancher watched closely as the woman cared for the child, observing the tenderness in her touch, the gentle lullabies she whispered, and the quiet pride that shone in her eyes. He learned quickly how to assist, changing diapers, preparing bottles, and offering comfort when the baby cried. Each small action strengthened their partnership, proving that care and love were built not just in grand gestures, but in the quiet, repeated acts of dedication that marked everyday life. Neighbors began to notice the change in the rancher. The quiet, solitary man who had once kept to himself was now seen carrying bundles of blankets, speaking gently to a baby, and moving with a purpose that was unmistakable. Though some continued to whisper, many began to respect the strength and character he had shown in embracing responsibility, caring for another, and building a home filled with love. The woman, too, felt the quiet pride of belonging, of having carved a place for herself and her child in a world that had once seemed uncertain and harsh. Life on the ranch continued, but it had transformed. The once silent home now echoed with the soft cries of a baby, laughter, and the steady rhythm of work and care. The rancher found joy in routine, in the simple tasks that made life meaningful. Feeding the animals, mending fences, tending the garden, and caring for his new family became intertwined, each action a reminder that life was no longer just about survival. It was about nurturing, protecting, and embracing the love that had come unexpectedly into his life. The woman, now a mother, discovered a strength she had not known before. Her worries and fears did not disappear, but she learned to face them with courage, supported by the rancher and the life they were building together. She laughed more often, moved more confidently across the land, and found a quiet satisfaction in seeing her child thrive. Together, she and the rancher became a team, their lives woven together through shared responsibility, care, and the small but profound moments of connection that define family. Even challenges continued to arrive, as they always do in life. Weather storms, unexpected chores, and the occasional difficulties of caring for a newborn tested their patience. But each challenge was met with determination, cooperation, and the understanding that they were no longer alone. Their bond had become strong enough to withstand hardships, and each small success, each resolved difficulty, strengthened their sense of unity. They had become partners not only in survival, but in love, trust, and shared purpose. The child grew quickly, bringing joy and meaning into every corner of the ranch. The rancher found himself speaking softly to the baby, promising protection, guidance, and love. He discovered that his life, once defined by solitude and routine, was now measured in laughter, milestones, and quiet moments of shared happiness. The woman, too, saw the change in herself and in him. They both understood that the greatest win in life was not measured by gains, wealth, or success, but by love, care, and the lives they had nurtured together. As months passed, the rancher and the woman began to reflect on how far they had come. What had started as an unexpected twist of fate, a poker game, a gamble, a chance encounter, had blossomed into a life full of meaning, purpose, and connection. They had built a home together, weathered storms, faced fears, and created a family grounded in care, trust, and love. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a sanctuary of hope, resilience, and joy. Neighbors and townspeople slowly began to recognize the transformation. The rancher's dedication, kindness, and quiet strength became apparent, and the woman's courage and devotion were equally admired. They were no longer simply the man who lived alone and the woman who had been won in a game. They were a family, respected and valued by those around them. The whispers of judgment faded, replaced by recognition of the life they had built together. In the evenings, as the sun set over the fields, the rancher would sit with the woman and their child, watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold. He would hold the baby gently in his arms, feeling the soft weight of life against his chest, and the woman would rest beside him, sharing in the quiet contentment that had once seemed impossible. They would talk softly about the future, about the work to be done, about dreams for their child, and about the unexpected journey that had brought them together. The rancher realized that life had taught him a profound lesson, that love and family are not always found in ordinary ways, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected circumstances. The woman had changed his life in ways he had never imagined, and together they had created a world where care, trust, and devotion were the cornerstones of every day. The child, the tangible proof of their bond, became the heart of their home and the promise of a future filled with hope. As the seasons changed, the ranch continued to thrive. The work remained hard, but it was now shared, and the presence of family made it meaningful. The woman and the rancher laughed more, worried less alone, and faced life's uncertainties together. They had discovered that partnership, trust, and love were far more valuable than solitude, routine, or the approval of others. Their lives, once separate and uncertain, were now intertwined in a story of resilience, care, and the unexpected joys that life could offer. Looking back, the rancher understood that the hand he had won in the poker game was never just about chance. It was the beginning of a life-altering journey, one that tested his character, awakened his heart, and gave him a family he had never imagined. The woman, too, reflected on the unexpected path that had brought her here, from fear and uncertainty to safety, trust, and love. Together they had transformed fate into a shared life filled with meaning, warmth, and hope. And so the rancher, the woman, and their child lived each day with gratitude for the life they had built, for the love that had grown between them, and for the unexpected twists of fate that had ultimately brought them together. The home, once quiet and empty, now thrived with laughter, care, and the unspoken understanding that family, trust, and love were the greatest treasures of all. Life had tested them, but it had also rewarded them with something far greater than they could have imagined, a life full of connection, purpose, and enduring joy.